I'm Daisy.
And I'm Terri.
And this is the Monday Mindset Podcast,
where we share things of interest to us and hopefully to you.
So let's get started with episode number 156. And today it is Terri's turn to share something. What have you got for us today, Terri?
Well, Daisy, in the midst of trying to come up with something kind of on short notice, I wasn't completely keeping track of the fact that I was going to share something with you. So kind of last minute went to my fallback of Jim Kwik. And I'm actually kind of excited about this topic. These episodes of Kwik Brain are rather short, which I love, but also they don't have then a ton of information. But often what they do is they spark some interest for me, and I think often they spark some possibility for discussion. So
Sometimes, though, I have been amazed at how dense the content is and still managed to have like 4 pages of notes. Depends on the subject, doesn't it? But sometimes you're thinking, oh, yeah, this will be fine. This won't be many notes.
Well, we'll see how this goes because
Stop packing so much in.
I didn't write any notes today, Daisy. I'm just going to talk about what I heard. So we'll see. Maybe we'll need to go back.
Yeah, but it's easier for you because you know all the different concepts and things.
Not on this one. So it's episode number 328, and it's called Mind Over Matter, Rewiring Self-talk to Unlock a Confident Life with Melina Vicario. So we had a guest on this episode, and she is from Argentina, and she is an expert in mind technology. Like, that sounds like a pretty cool job. She's a certified neurolinguistic programmer and also pretty committed to biohacking, and she's written several books. So in this episode, they talk about self-talk, which is a big topic that I often talk about. But what they talked about it a little differently in that I think sometimes when I talk about self-talk and when other people think about improving their self-talk, we really focus a lot on turning it from critical to more supportive. Some people might think it just means saying nice things to yourself, but really, I think it's okay to acknowledge, wow, I'm really struggling with this, and that's okay. I have time. I can work on it. I don't think we have to say, it's okay. I'm the best at this ever. I can still do it. So they talked about 2 other parts of it. The first point they talked about in your self-talk is the inflection or tone in your voice as you speak to yourself. And this is both externally when you're speaking this out loud and when you're speaking it internally, just in your mind. And what they talked about is it's not just the power of the words, but how you say them. And them talking about this just kind of made me giggle a little bit because some of you know I was a former middle school English teacher and speech teacher. So I had to teach 7th, 8th, and 9th graders to give speeches, to talk publicly. And I'm not sure where we are with this now. Some of you who work with younger people now could probably tell me the status of this. But at that time, when a 7th grader would get up to give their speech, it would sound a little bit like this. And then you have to put in the chocolate chips, and then you fold them in until they're all mixed. And then you're going to do this. And you can hear every sentence, the inflection went up at the end of the sentence. And in reality, what this does to our mind, our unconscious mind that's listening, is it says question. This is uncertainty, this inflection. And then she used the example of James Bond. Now, I'm not someone who's ever watched a James Bond movie.
No way.
Totally true. But you can imagine everyone knows the catchphrase. So she talked about talking about James Bond. And she said, when you hear the name James Bond, what do you think? What do you think of him just from what you know? And Jim Kwik was like, well, I think of him as confident and, self-assured and powerful. And she said, okay, how does he introduce himself? He says, Bond.
James Bond.
James Bond. And you see that the inflection goes down. She says that helps your mind receive that as confidence and certainty. Whereas if he had said, Bond, James Bond,
Yeah, I see what you mean.
you would not have a sense of him as confident and strong.
It's a full stop, isn't it, if it goes down?
Yeah. Yeah. So she talked about some other examples of that, but I just thought that was a great illustration of if we end our statements to ourself, our self-talk, if we have the inflection up, we are telling that part of our mind that's listening, this is uncertain. Like if we say, I can do this versus I can do this, it communicates something different, even though it's the same words. So just changing the tone of the words that we're using, changing, like you said, the end of the comment. If it goes up, it reflects uncertainty and a question. And if it goes down and is more solid, it gives more of a sense of confidence and certainty.
It's so funny. I can remember my mum complaining about this constantly, and I can pretty much date it to, well, it was when I was in my teens, and it's when Australian soaps arrived to the UK, and that's when everybody would end their sentences like this, because it was a real Australian thing, you know? And it was like, good day. But it was this, every sentence ended with a uptick at the end. And it would drive her absolutely round the bend. And you could see it, you know, it swept across the nation like a virus amongst the youth, that everybody, just all their sentences started to go up at the end. And we haven't completely lost it. It's not as bad as it was. It was really, really bad when neighbours arrived on our shores. It got really, really bad. But it's eased off a bit. But yeah, I know what you mean. And I don't think it really happened that much before then. I could be wrong on that. But it must have been a marked difference, because it was noted, not just by my mum, but, you know, I think people even discussed it on the BBC.
I think here in the US, and this is just my recollection of it, and of course I have a skewed perception because I was teaching young people at the time, but I remember one of the older teachers, a little bit older than I was, it would just drive her insane listening to them end sentences with that up inflection. And to me, it just sounded very much like a generational thing. But I think as you really think about it, it does change how you hear the information. And it's kind of funny. I like to listen to audiobooks a lot, as we know. And I was listening to a fictional book, just a kind of light book. And there is this part in the book where the mother-in-law of the bride doesn't like the bride. And the bride introduced herself, and let's say, you know, this is Terri Lance. And she said, it's not a question. Don't ask it. And so I think that's, again, it's just a good reminder that it shows maybe some lack of confidence or certainty in something. So if we're going to work on positive self-talk and nurturing self-talk, we want it to be with certainty. And then they moved into this other part that I thought was really interesting too. And again, kind of talking about the tone or the sound, I even think kind of the resonance of what we're saying. And there's probably a more technical way to explain this. And but she said, basically, you want your sounds sounding round and not sharp. Now I'm listening so carefully to how my voice goes up in the middle of my sentences. She said that there's this device, which you can actually download as an app, called a sound, I'm not maybe going to say this correctly, but oscilloscope. It's OSCILLOSCOP, oscilloscope. And it reminds me a little bit of the thing we use when we're recording, and it just shows you the kind of the sound waves from what you're saying, and it can show you'll see what the frequency is with words that you say that are more round and more sharp. So she says, for example, and I remember this from learning about kind of maybe some self-hypnosis, using words like calm. And you can almost, when you're saying it, you can tell the sound, or you can think of it in this way, the sound is kind of rounded out. So round, calm, soothe, smooth.
I'm trying to think, what's the term for that? You must know that as an English teacher. Is it onomatopoeia comes to mind, but I could have completely the wrong word there.
Onomatopoeia, yes, means like smack. The word sounds like the meaning.
Right, so not quite what you're saying, but along the same sort of lines.
But again, the important thing is that this reaches the kind of unconscious mind better. And then she talked about sharp words that are kind of more pointed. And if you were to speak into the oscilloscope, you would see it's a different frequency. And we were just talking about this about our recording here on the app that we use. So when you think about things like if you in your self-talk were saying, you got to do it now, quick, that's going to have a different effect rather than let's relax and work on this. Like just this roundness of sound versus the sharp, shrill, pointed way of speaking.
Sounding more like somebody's shouting commands at you.
Which we just don't respond to as well. And I had to laugh when I heard this because I'm going to go on a little tangent here, but one of my favorite shows in the past 4 or 5 years is an Australian show actually called Offspring. And it used to be on Netflix. And I will admit, I have watched it 3 times now, the whole series, 7 seasons worth.
Wow.
3 times.
That's a commitment.
Love this. Well, it's no longer on Netflix, and I thought it was gone forever. And just the other day, I found it on Hulu. So if anyone's interested, they can watch Offspring. But there's a character on here who very much uses clipped, sharp ways of communicating always. And she's very anxious and she's very stressed out all the time. And I don't remember if she read a book or she went to a training or something, but she learned that if she talked like this, she wouldn't get so anxious and stressed, and other people wouldn't either. And my partner and I were watching it, and she laughed so hard. And so for months, when we would be talking and something was stressing her out, she would say, well, if I think about it now, and we would just laugh. But it's interesting to me when these real life examples fit into, there's something to this, that using that more rounded sound gets to our brain more effectively. And that more sharp, clipped way of speaking doesn't. And that which does get in, like you said, it sounds like a drill sergeant. It sounds like I'm being yelled at, which most of us kind of want to resist anyway. The last part of the episode, I'm not going to go into any real detail about. Because of her biohacking interest, she also went into talking about what kinds of products you use on your body and the chemicals and things. And as I was listening, I thought, wait a minute, we were just talking about how to talk to myself, and now we're talking about whether I should wear lotion. But of course, it was in line with what I believe and think about anyway. But great little episode about thinking about the tone of our self-talk, not just the word choices. We can really affect the positive impact of self-talk by being aware of the tone.
It makes me think right from the start, actually, when you mentioned self-talk and you talked about, the kind of voice we have in our head and the tone and all the rest of it. I straight away went to, lots of different people talk about this, but I go back to the IFS, the kind of counselling I had, where they get you to imagine these different parts in whatever way works for you. I'm a very visual person, so I used to visualize them. Some people it's more sound, some people it's more feeling, whatever it is. And I would have these characters for all these different parts. And the critic in general part is a very typical part and has a seesaw of relationships with other parts and all the rest of it. But I mean, it's commonplace, isn't it, for the self-critic to take on the image and the voice of quite often your mother. I know we often like to blame our mothers, but the self-critic voice often is. And it just made me think of that every time you were talking about, the tone and that sort of telling off and the very clipped language. It made me think of that sort of critical voice, your mother telling you off when, well, not necessarily when you were younger, but probably mostly when you were younger. Do the dishes like I asked you to, or why haven't you tidied your room up yet? Or, it is that the tone and the timbre and the everything that comes with it. So, and working hard to change that, changing the tone, changing the image you have in your mind to somebody that's just a little bit more of a coach and a supporter but still, like you said at the beginning, it's not all about, blowing smoke up your backside. It's about, I'm going to hold you to account, but I'm just going to be a little bit more positive and encouraging about it to try and get you to do what I want you to do.
Yeah, and I think that's an important way to think about it too. I can practice changing my self-talk words, but if I'm still using that critical, judgy, harsh voice, it's not going to get into my brain and have a positive effect. So even though the message is helpful, I'm probably not going to hear it in a helpful way if I'm still using that old, more complicated, harsh voice.
I quite like the approach of coming at it from this, thinking about the tone, thinking about the words you're using, thinking about the way you're speaking, the inflection you're putting on, not going up at the end, but confident, and these rounded words. Just coming at it from that direction will probably push out a little bit if you've got that very sort of critical, a particular person in your mind that comes into your mind when you've got this self-talk, or just whatever it is. It just approaching it sort of a bit, coming up behind and taking it by surprise, as it were, really, with doing these more practical things. You can sort of push it out that way. I like it.
Absolutely. Just think of a lot of things that we might say to ourselves, especially if we're working on things like reframing, working on meditation, any of that if we are saying life is good, it's like we're asking someone for that versus life is good.
Big difference.
I think they used that example in the podcast, that just, again, exact same words, but the tone of it conveys something very different. And then if you think about when you're upset, or, when you need somebody else to help, serve as kind of a calming force for you, you probably don't want them using those more sharp tones, and you don't want them using that ending that is on the upbeat, because it makes it sound like they don't really believe what they're saying.
Yeah.
Versus if someone says to you, I know this is really hard right now, but everything's going to work out.
Yeah. You want that certainty.
Everything is going to be okay. Versus, it's okay. Everything is going to be okay.
Maybe.
Everything's going to work out.
Yeah.
Has a totally different effect. Absolutely.
So what people need to do is just imagine you giving their self-talk, and they'll be fine.
But think about, what is it? If my voice has that effect for you, why?
Exactly.
That it's about that tone. It's about the tone ending on the down instead of the up, and the using those rounded sounds more.
Yeah, and I like the James Bond reminder, but obviously, if you're not somebody who watches those films, I'm sure you can come up with something else. But yes, as soon as you said that example and I thought of it, I'm Bond, James Bond. It is very, like you say, it's very assertive. It's very matter of fact. This is the way it is. There's no two ways about it.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So I hope that people can take from this just some looking at their self-talk, again, not just the words, but how they're saying it to themselves, what it sounds like when they're speaking it verbally and when they're speaking it inside your head. Because some of our self-talk never is heard to anyone else. It's only happening in our head. But if you can work on those things, it can affect how you're receiving it.
Absolutely. Well, in the meantime, till we meet again, I hope you have a very wonderful week.
You too, Daisy.
Notice I went down at the end there.
You too, Daisy. Take good care, everyone.
Bye-bye.